State Department of Social Protection, Susan Mochache, who's now joining me in studio as we just seek to answer a number of the questions that have come up and understand the Inua Jamii program that is expected to make the whole situation better for Kenyans, especially the older persons. Susan, thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News Desk. I think I'll just start with the next financial year, as you say. What will be better than what we're already seeing?
I think really, as we now celebrate the International Day for Older Persons, there's a lot for us to celebrate as a country in terms of the care and the commitment that we have shown as a society, as a government, for older persons, particularly in addressing the issue of poverty in old age. The issue of giving dignity to older persons. This program has grown over the years. We have since grown to about over 300,000 beneficiaries in the program, about 320,000. The government decided from the next financial year, through, of course, the support of His Excellency the President, that we will support all elderly persons who are 70 years and above. Because prior to that, we always increased every year based on availability of funds. And of course, it meant that we had to apply some criteria to select who gets into the program. And that comes with the whole challenge of inclusion and exclusion of people. You have a lot of old people who are neglected, some of them really truly deserving of care, but you leave out because you can't pick everybody. So from next year, I think the big gain for us as a country is that all our 70 years old and above will be taken care of by the government. And of course, this is voluntary. Not everybody needs to register to the program. If somebody feels they're able to take care of themselves, they don't need to be on the program, because this is a social welfare program targeting the elderly persons that are vulnerable.
What is the criteria for when you decide you're eligible, if everyone else decided to register?
Really, we say it's voluntary because if you feel that you don't need, the care of government to be given a monthly stipend, you don't have to register. But in the event that you feel that you truly do need the support of government to be able to have meet your basic needs and take care of yourself in old age, then certainly, the program is there for one to join. For instance, myself, would I register my parents? Perhaps not. I can take care of them. So really, it's a program for all the over 70s that require to be taken care of by government.
But I'm imagining, is the 310,000, are they the only ones who registered, or are they the only ones who received this amount of money? Because I would like to imagine that the number was bigger for those who registered to be in this program.
Yeah, I think since the government made the policy decision to increase the threshold for beneficiaries of the cash transfer program to 70 years and above, the ministry has been registering all over 70 years that wish to be in the program. And this process has been ongoing. We completed it just about a few weeks ago. And we have on board over 500,000 beneficiaries that we have put since added into the program. And so it really means that, we now move into the next process of carding them and really having them incorporated in the program, knowing full well that we have already provided for the financing of the program, of that scale-up in this in the next year's financial, in fact, this year's financial budget. So we are just ready to begin paying out from January.
And that would cover 500,000 that are, as of now, registered?
Including those the 310 that are already in the program, and then including the additional 500,000.
Looking at the numbers from the various counties, looking at Kilifi with the highest number, and counties like Isiolo registering very, very low numbers. What from the research that has gone into that, what are the dynamics on why we are getting a high number in specific counties and a very low number from other counties?
Really, the reason is because prior to the decision that we will now take care of all the over 70 years, we had to select beneficiaries. And so we applied a criteria based on the poverty index of a county and also the population within that county. So the population, the poverty index helped us to rank and to be able to estimate the number of elderly persons that we'll be targeting. So obviously, counties that have got a higher prevalence of poverty would then automatically qualify to get more beneficiaries compared to those that do not have the level of poverty experienced there. But of course, with the new policy, that is set to change because the challenge of selecting, as I said earlier, is that whole issue of the errors of omission and commission. So you leave out, or rather even sometimes the whole basic issue of concentrating on areas with a high poverty index. Other people would argue that while certain areas may not have a high poverty index, they do have a lot of vulnerable old people who are suffering old age poverty and who deserve to be on the program. But because of the application of the selection criteria, then there was a bias to focus more on the poorer counties.
Well, this is a question that I've seen a number of people ask. What is the criteria? What is the process of registration if you have an elderly person whom you think should be enrolled in this particular program? What is the registration process? How do you go about it?
It's fairly straightforward. The person just needs to visit the office of a social development officer, and any chief would be able to direct the citizens to those offices, or at a Huduma center where our officers sit, because we have social development officers at Huduma centers, and they just carry their ID card. And that is really what determines the registration. If we confirm that indeed you're 70 years old, then we just register you into the program.
There have also been concerns that a number of relatives could use this particular program for the elderly for their own use, that they register an elderly person, but at the end of the day, these funds don't really get to them. So do you follow up and ensure that those that have been registered on the program really are taken care of by the funds that have been released by the government?
Yeah, I mean, those challenges happen, for older persons who are very vulnerable, and some of them are not able to move, and so they have to depend on a caregiver. Because, in the event that an older person cannot be able to move and, access the money for themselves, then they choose a caretaker of their own choice. And so it is always our hope that whoever they choose is somebody they trust will give them the money. You will find in a village several old people choosing one person because they believe that person can be able to be honest enough with their money. But of course, you can't take away, where an elderly person, entrusted somebody to be their caregiver, and they take the money and they don't necessarily ensure that the money reaches the older person. Sometimes that can happen, but the older person also has a right to change the caregiver. So at any given time that, an older person is experiencing those challenges of somebody diverting the money to themselves rather than passing it on to them, they just come to our offices again, and we change the caregiver, and they give us somebody of their preferred choice.
So, in essence, that means that the older persons come to you. You do not go to them. Even after you've disbursed the money, you don't really follow up to see whether this works for them.
No, not at all. I mean, on the contrary, our officers are based in every sub-county, and part of their work is to interact with communities and assist the communities, and even help the beneficiaries under the cash transfer programs, both for the older persons. We also have the ones for the orphaned and vulnerable children. We have the other program for persons living with disability. They have a responsibility to put these individuals in groups and form what we call beneficiary welfare committees. And, the whole point of having this is so that we also encourage savings amongst the beneficiaries. So they come together and, in some cases, they all agree to save 50 shillings. And this is money that they can draw from, sometimes to even buy, some basic tools and equipments that can help them in terms of beginning to become productive as individuals. So you can see that our officers are continuously engaging with the beneficiaries. And, we are still also at a point where we are rethinking and redesigning programs in terms of supporting the beneficiaries to become more productive with these resources. And of course, we recognize that the Beneficiary Welfare Committee is one fundamental avenue. and we're in that process of designing programs that will ensure that we achieve that objective. So it's not that they get the money and we leave them
disappear.
on their own. No, and of course, we also do monitoring. A lot of monitoring goes on, and just checking how the program is doing, where the weaknesses are, and what social programs then we can develop to support the communities. I mean, there are older persons who can take money and spend it on alcohol. Our officers, once notified by the local chiefs of those problems, then have that responsibility to go in and speak to the older persons, sensitize them, and also ensure that they have enrolled themselves into a beneficiary welfare committee.
And in the same breath, we're talking about money here, and you know how that conversation goes. So even as you talk about those who register for this, you'd get people who register and they don't necessarily need it. Do you do background checks to ensure that really this is a very vulnerable person and they indeed need this money, so that you avoid an instance where money goes to those who don't need it and those who really need it don't get a chance to be enrolled in the program?
Yeah, when we were applying the selection criteria, obviously we tried everything possible and using a very scientific process to identify the most deserving. But obviously, there would be one or two complaints of somebody who sneaked in, maybe an undeserving beneficiary. But I think this whole issue of us including everybody in the program eliminates that. And we just hope that, people will be honest enough to know that maybe, I don't need to be on the program. I mean, there are people who definitely will not go and queue at the chief's place at the social development office to be put on a program, and they can take care of themselves. So it's really left up to the goodwill of the people, and a lot of Kenyans really would not want that to happen. I know people who have discovered that their parents registered, of course, because of pressure at home, and now they're saying, please, I don't want my mother or my father to be put on the program because I can take care of them. But it's their right. If they want to be on the program, very well and good. We do not apply any selective criteria as long as they're 70 years old. But ideally, we allow it to be voluntary. If you don't feel that you need to be supported by the state on this social welfare program, then by all means, you don't need to register.
So you mentioned that the elderly persons also rely on some of the caregivers they have back at home, or whom they decide will be receiving money on their behalf. How do you ensure that the caregivers themselves do not misuse this money for them?
I think there's sometimes little control about this, but also, think about the environment in which most of these older persons that have been on the program, particularly, targeting the very poor. And I can tell you there are a lot of older persons who face poverty at old age. They have working children, but sometimes they are abandoned. Their children don't visit them. This whole issue of the loss of our social norms and values, particularly our African traditions to value and cherish and take care of our elderly persons, as it continues to diminish, you find a lot of older persons literally neglected. And so you cannot do much when you have then people who want to take advantage of them further. But in most cases, these older people are also pretty brilliant themselves. And as soon as they face a problem, they will quickly try and reach out to the chief and ask that a change be made. And of course, a social development officer will have to visit and
there's a question here
do that.
On Twitter. Javin Omukalanga asks, other than age, what else is considered before incorporating old people in the social welfare program?
Age is the main. Is really the consideration that we take into account. And obviously, I think if somebody is already enjoying, a pension, again, why would you want to be put on a cash transfer program? Because really, it does target that very vulnerable person. So there is no other criteria that is applied, because even as they register, one of the questions that will be asked is, are you on a pension? And if you are on a pension, you are already enjoying some benefits and support for your old age. So again, we strictly rely on people just being very honest as they are registering into the program. But age is the basic and fundamental criteria.
Okay. I'd like us to veer off from the older persons because of a question that has been put forward here. Abel Kirwa says, I'm a physically challenged student and I've heard that there are funds for persons with disability. I've never gotten a cent. Just talk to us about this other section of the program? Because I know there's
Yes,
one.
yes, the government also recognizes the vulnerability amongst persons living with disability, the vulnerability to the individuals and the families that take care of them, and that is the rationale behind the cash transfer for persons living with disability. That program is designed to target families that have a person living with disability that is severe, and then therefore constraints some members of the family from working because that person needs 24-hour care, and it would typically be a household that is poor. And so you are able to ensure that the basic needs of that person and their family is met through the cash transfer program. However, through the National Council for Persons Living with Disabilities, there are several programs that target people living with disability. Amongst them, one is the bursary targeting children living with disabilities, and it is administered through that the fund. We also provide assistive devices, wheelchairs, walking sticks, hearing aids. These are also provided to individuals who apply. We also provide for sunscreen lotions to all people suffering from albinism, and the hats, the protective hats. And for a while, the challenge has been that the service was not decentralized. But again, in line with the support of devolution, we now have officers from the National Council stationed at every county, and really the person needs to visit the officers and make their application. And then, they would then be able to draw from that support that is available, because the government sets aside at least about 400 billion per annum just to be able to provide bursary and assistive devices.
All right, I would want us to wrap up as you give us your final comments as you answer this question. Wanyonyi is asking, why can't they use the mobile money platforms to remit the monies to older persons, because most of them have phones?
You'll be amazed, Wanyonyi. Unfortunately, no. We have, of course, considered that option, but we also came to realize that a good number of the people that are targeted in this program actually don't even own phones. You're talking about very vulnerable individuals. A phone does not exist in such a household. These are individuals who sometimes, through the cash transfer, are finally able to even get a decent roof over their houses. I mean, they deal with the most fundamental because they have been living in a house where rain literally pours in. So phones are not prevalent amongst that group. And then secondly, there is also the issue of limitations of coverage in certain parts of the country. And you'll also be surprised, some of these elderly people don't want to use the phone. They want to have a card, walk to the bank themselves, and draw their own money. But we are looking at having a solution that gives our elderly persons an option where they opt to have their money transferred onto their phones. Then they will have that option.
Right.
Where they opt to go to the bank, then they do. So that is the focus of the ministry now, bringing diversity to the payment solution. But as we conclude, I think I'd really want to say that as we celebrate the day of the International Day for Older Persons, the theme for this year is really, celebrating the untapped potential of elderly persons, their talents and the contributions they make in society, and to urge all of us that we should all move to show an act of kindness towards the older people within our families, reach out to them, even just a phone call, acknowledge them, plan on some sort of care for them that perhaps you had not considered before. But let this International Day be a true celebration for every elderly person in Kenya.
All right. Susan, thank you so much for coming into KTN News Desk. She is the Principal Secretary of the State Department of Social Protection. We're talking about the cash transfer program for older persons in the country. This week, on Thursday, we will be celebrating the International Day for Older Persons. So very timely conversation we have here. Thank you very much for that. Let's quickly take a break. We'll be back with more here on KTN News Desk as we look at the